Hello YouTube, this is Sam Gerrans from Qur'anite.com. Today is Wednesday the 18th of October 2017, and today the subject is Layl Al Qadr, the 97th Surah or chapter of the Qur'an. Now my voice is a little bit sort of the worse for wear because I've already recorded this once and discovered that for some reason the audio didn't work, so I'm doing it again. What I discovered from doing it the first time is this is quite a long presentation and it requires a certain amount of concentration. This is not something that you can just do the washing up or drive and really get. There are parts of my work which is its analysis. However, the upside to losing that work was between then and now I came across a quote which I think is very apposite. It comes from Isaiah Berlin, who said, "To understand is to perceive patterns." And that's very well said, because this is really what my work is. So if you come into this video, you don't really know much about my work. This is going to be, you might want to watch something else because this is quite involved. This is involves some of the methodology, but in order to unpick this one particular surah, it will give you an instance of my methodology in practice. What I'm going to do is work through the surah and read my notes to it, and we'll see how we go. So this is the 97th Surah, and it's called the Determination. This is how I render it, the Determination. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to give the backstory to this. If you're not from a quote-unquote Muslim culture or Muslim background, whatever we mean by that, and my definition is a culture which embraces the symbols which have attached themselves to a religion which is called Islam. So that's my kind of working definition of it. If you come from that background, then you will know that Layl Al Qadr is defined by the traditionalist as being a night, usually not known which night, in the last 10 nights, somewhere in there, of Ramadan. I'm going to leave aside the question of what Ramadan may or may not be Quranically speaking, although I have made a video on it and you're welcome to look it up. That's not the focus here. But really, what is interesting in my study of the Qur'an and the having to engage with, the traditionalist and his methodology as a result of this, is the recurring theme is what the traditionalist does over and over again. Is one of his sort of core methods is to find some small part of some small text somewhere and then make his extraneous claims based on his external literature in order to shoehorn himself and this other literature, this huge literature, and the Shia claim that they don't do the same thing. They kind of do. Maybe it's a bit different in the sort of mode, but they have a hadith literature, they do. And so, but I'm really talking mainly about Sunnis here, which make up the vast majority of those who call themselves Muslims. And then they shoehorn themselves and their specialist claims over the Quran into the mind. It's a form of bait and switch, especially as concerns Westerners who've come to be impressed by the Quran and then think that there's some correlation between this book and this insane religion, and clearly there is none. So, or very little. I mean, there are good Muslims, but this is and there are good Roman Catholics. What we're discussing is the actual benefits or the merits, rather, or otherwise, of the Quran as a scripture. That's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in this cultural narrative. Anyway, all that to say, if you are from this background, and I'm not, I'm from a Christian background culturally. I'm from a country which is formed part of Christendom, and just to say that that Islam and Christianity are not comparable things. The comparison with Islam, in the sense that it's used predominantly is between Christendom and Islam, and Christendom was a political entity, and and the inheritor to that, so far as I can see, is NATO. So, just to go back to this point about Layl Al Qadr, I only discovered recently, if I had found it before, I'd have put it in my work, the following, and I've already said that Layl Al Qadr is said by Muslims, believed by Muslims to be this special time of specialness, and they don't know when it is exactly, but this is the time when God is supposed to create the divine decree for the coming year. And you see this quite awful sight of these people who, you know how they live the rest of the year, but on this, this time, they're there in the mosque and praying to Allah to help them buy a new car, a new Mercedes, whatever it is. And I'm not saying everybody's like that, but I knew a guy personally, and I knew how he lived. But on Ramadan, he was a changed man just for Ramadan. And I remember him telling me that he said, "Oh yes, I've read the Qur'an twice all the way through in Ramadan." And I couldn't stop myself. I said, "Well, then why don't you apply any of it?" And this is really the thing. So this is this setting up of special times to be specially holy, which is actually a form of polytheism, and the Qur'an tells you not to do it. We're not to observe times and seasons and so on. This is, it's like worshipping the sun. It's the same sort of thing. Anyway, what I found very interesting was in my study of the religion called Judaism, the concept of Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year. And what we find is that Rosh Hashanah, which means literally the beginning of the year, goes. I'm reading from CBN, which is a sort of cozy up to Jews kind of Christian thing. And they go through the customs, and they talk about the shofar and the various, what that was all about, supposedly. And then we get to the main point. Unlike Passover, the Bible, and what we mean by Bible in this context, we're talking about the Old Testament, as Christians would call it, and the Bible as Jews would, correctly call it, because that is their Bible and it's right, does not clearly identify Rosh Hashanah. I'll just translate that into English. It isn't in the Bible, all right? Nowhere, not found there. With a historical event, it's not there. So we must look to tradition to discover its significance. According to Talmudic tradition, I'm going to probably kind of emphasize this word again as we go, the 10 days of awe, excuse me, which begin at Rosh Hashanah, are the time in which God determines the fate of each human being. So I was very interested to read this. Layl Al Qadr is a syncretic event. The traditionalists have looked at this. They don't know what it means. They've made up a hadith to just try and invent what it means, and what they're trying to do is get something a bit like what the Jews have got. But the Jews haven't really got it. The Jews haven't got a lot of stuff when you really dig into what they claim. I'm not going to get into that now, but I would like to make a video about Jewish claims. So I've been doing a lot of studying on this very interesting subject. And just interestingly, just as an aside, if you're looking for something good to read, and I don't have any financial interest in this, I just think it's a really good book. Who Was Jesus? A Conspiracy in Jerusalem by Kamal Salabi. I've read this a couple of times. I'm reading it again. And what's the key takeaway for me from this is the distinction between Bani Israel and those who hold to Judaism. Judaism was invented. Traditionalist Jews would have you believe that Judaism is something which really originates with Moses, and it's not true. What's true is it originates with Ezra. This is what's true. This is when the scriptures were given the post-exilic shape. And you can understand why. This was a response to the fact that the Jews are supposed to be the chosen people, had lost the temple, had lost everything. And anyway, that's a separate issue. But what happened in Babylon was the creation of the Talmud, or the codification of it. And if you are a Muslim, or you identify as a Muslim, you embrace Islamic symbologies, or those symbologies called Islamic, then you should find it interesting, especially as the tensions between those communities that call themselves Jewish and those communities which call themselves Islamic, is that Layl Al Qadr, according to the Sunni, and I assume, I don't know the Shia, but I don't know. Do they have? You tell me below. If you come from a Shia background, I'm not really interested in one or the other, frankly speaking. But if you are, then you can tell me whether they have the same or a different concept of Layl Al Qadr. I'd be interested to know that. Fundamentally, this comes from not even the Bible, whatever we mean by that. It comes from the Talmud, as does almost all of them. Messianic narrative, all of this stuff. I'll get into that another time. So just so you know where this came from, or at the very least, you've got to admit it's an interesting correlation. Now I'll go back to what I said about Isaiah Berlin and understanding being about patterns. To understand is to perceive patterns. Perceiving patterns is really what I do and what my entire methodology is based upon. And if you want to understand my methodology, download my work, which you may do for free. This is my entire life's work. And I set aside 3 entire years of my life. I earned nothing. I practically didn't see my family for all of this time. I wanted to produce something of value, and I give it away for free. But you do have to read it. I even read large parts of it for you, but if you will find that you benefit much more by reading it yourself. And if you read I don't know how many pages it is, a few, in the introduction, I go through my methodology, and it's all about patterns. So that's that bit. So what I'm going to do is going to go through Al Qadr, the Surah or chapter 97, bit by bit, and introduce you, if you don't know my work, to some of the methodology by which I came to these conclusions. Excuse me. And I will sort of do this in an iterative way. So we'll go through the chapter a couple of times. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold. And hopefully by the end of it, you will understand this surah on the basis of patterns rather than on the basis of Talmudic. It's not even second hand, it's third hand borrowings of inventions of Jewish sages. So here we go. The chapter, like all chapters, apart from one, opens with the honorific, the Bismillah. So Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. My own view is that these are purely chapter divisions and nothing more outside of the opening to the first surah. The fact is that in most mushafs, in most imprints of the Qur'an, these are not numbered as verses, not counted as verses, which seem to support that view outside of the first, excuse me, the opening verse of the opening surah. So we open and we go into the surah itself proper. And before I get into this, I'm going to say there are a couple of things that if you really want to understand what I'm talking about, then one thing to look at is my work on the muqaṭṭaʿāt. And the muqaṭṭaʿāt is really the mysterious letters like alif, lam, mim, and sad, and qaf, and noon, and so on, which precede certain surahs of the Qur'an. That work stands, and that work is consistent, and it explains the meaning of the muqaṭṭaʿāt on a consistent deductive basis in terms of patterns, and it's consistent, and it just is. And frankly, I haven't seen anything to come close to it. There are certain claims made by certain quarters, usually to do with people who are very interested in the number 19. You look at both and make up your own mind. That's what I'm going to say. My work includes all of these letters and all of the Quran, and it doesn't need to change them or anything like that. It is what it is. So, if you're open for study, read, consider, and come to your own conclusions. I know where I stand. However, what that work also opens is the understanding, or opens the door to the understanding of what as-sujud means, Quranically speaking. And I'm not going to get into it deeply here, other than to say that as-sujud is a night vigil, which consists of portions of the last part of the Qur'an, beginning at Surah 50. And there are 3 portions which are actually divided, which you find indicated by both the muqaṭṭaʿāt and the contents of one particular surah. It's too big for me to get into now. I'm not going to, this subject that I'm going to now explain is big enough by itself. This requires study. This isn't Facebook. This is for people who want to understand what God sent down to mankind. And I was sufficiently interested to do this work, and if you're sufficiently interested to follow this work and consider it for yourself, well then you are. And if you're not, go and find something else to do, because you're not going to like this video, because that's what this is about. And it's not fun, it's work. So what I'm going to do is, now that you understand, or I've at least identified as-sujud in its Quranic sense, as a proper noun, as a time of night vigil, and if you've done that work and been through that work, then you understand that. Now I'm going to get into Surah 97. So we know what the Muslims typically think it means. I reject that out of hand for many reasons, and now we're going to get into the meat of those reasons, but I was highly suspect of it before, to be perfectly honest with you. And you should be too. And especially if you understand, as now you would do, that the origins of this assertion is a sort of syncretic parody or calque on the Talmud. Anyway, and the Talmud and Hadith have some correlation, not in terms of their structure, but in terms of their function, i.e. they're a usurping literature claiming canonical status. So let's begin. Verse 1. We sent it down on the night of the determination. Now I'm going to read my notes, and some of this is quite arduous, so please feel free to stop and listen and go back, and I'm going to include all of this in the drop down below. I'm going to cut and paste these notes and put them all below, so you can go through this for yourself. You can check the references for yourself, and you should. So to begin, there is much to unpack in this chapter. The first question here is, what is sent down? We sent it down on the night of the determination. Well, what is it? The traditionalist asserts that the pronoun object, i.e. the it here, refers to revelation, his view being confirmed as the correct one. I mean, the traditionalist is right sometimes, The problem is he didn't generally know why, Quranically speaking, that he's right. I mean, like a paraplegic, or somebody with bodily defects sometimes hits a good tennis shot. It's just they can't do so consistently, and they don't know why they did. What we want to know is why, and explain how, and be able to do so consistently. So his view is correct, or confirmed as the correct one, albeit for reasons other than those he typically offers, by review of all instances where the formulation "we sent it down" occurs outside the present context, and then I list them as about 10 or 12 of them. Now this is part of my process. It's called pan-textual analysis. When I want to know what something means, I look at all of the instances of this, and I draw them all together, almost like trawler fishing, and I get all of them and I put them on the deck of my boat, and then I go through and I analyze. So each of these instances, of all the instances where the expression "we sent it down" occurs, deals either directly with revelation, or in a small minority of cases with water, itself an obvious symbol for God's word being sent down and then bringing forth fruit. In treating the traditionalist's existing presentation, i.e. that Layl Al Qadr means something like some special night, that means something like the Jewish, remind myself, the Jewish Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, because that's what he's really claiming for it, okay? That Talmudic concept. In treating the traditionalists' existing presentation, this existing Talmudically derived syncretic presentation, we must address Surah 44, verses 3 through 4, where some see a foreshadowing of or a reference to what we have here at chapter 97, namely Layl Al Qadr, the value of which they assume to be the night of divine decree, an assumption based entirely on sources as other than the Qur'an, as we've just said. So this is where we really need to start, because we need to address this particular issue, because the traditionalist typically sees a connection between these two parts of the Qur'an, and it is the Qur'an which we are analysing. Verses 44, 3 through 4 then read, "We sent it down on a blessed night." You see, so the traditionalists say, blessed night, see, there's a correlation between these two, it's talking about the same thing. "We are warning, wherein every wise command is distinguished." Now, at a superficial level, there seems to be a correlation, and perhaps you can go with, and this is the whole thing about the presentation of the traditionalist. It's superficially, possibly, if you're lazy, it might seem in some way convincing. But the Qur'an says, why do they not consider the Qur'an with care? The Qur'an also claims to be consistent. And the traditionalist presentation is not consistent. If you take his presentation of all kinds of words, it seems to fit here and it seems to fit there. But it's like the ugly sisters trying to squeeze a glass, the princess or the Cinderella's glass shoe on. Yeah, you can squeeze the toes in, but the heel pops out, or you manage to get the heel in, but the toes won't go. This is how it works, and it is really only effective upon ignorant and lazy minds. Why? Because they haven't done their homework. They don't know why this isn't. You're just taking this one little case in isolation. It seems to work. Yeah, here's ṣalāt would be a good example. Here, ṣalāt means this. Oh, okay, it means that. But somewhere else it means something else. And over here it means Jewish synagogues. Oh, and over here it means blessings. And over here it means, well, what does it mean? It means whatever they want it to mean, because fundamentally the mind just starts to shut down. Well, I wasn't prepared to accept this. This is cultic, and I wanted to know what the Qur'an meant. And if it's true, then it's true. And if it's not true, I'm going to go and do something else with my life. But I'm convinced that it is true, but not for the reasons the traditionalist presents. So, to continue. The context then at verses 44, 3 through 4, we sent it down on a blessed night. Excuse me, we are warning, wherein every wise command is distinguished. The context there indisputably treats of revelation. Compare by the clear law, or the clear book at 44:2. So I'm agreeing here with the traditionalist. And accordingly, it is that, i.e. the law, the book, or revelation, which is the object sent down at the beginning of chapter 4. Moreover, I agree with the traditionalist that it is only reasonable that the same is the case here at chapter 97. That which is referenced by means of it is likewise revelation. So I'm saying the traditionalist is right. The traditionalist is right. He doesn't know why, generally speaking, but he is, and I've just explained why he is. However, at chapter 44, the traditionalist likes to concentrate on the sending down of the revelation to Muhammad as the special private event focused on Muhammad the Prophet, and he leverages and extends this assumption in order to inform the sense one is to derive under his guidance here at chapter 97. And it is this topic, or this aspect of this topic, that I now wish to address. So what he does is, he's saying that's all about Muhammad, you see, as a prophet. And it was sent down in this, it clearly was sent down to Muhammad, but we're looking at what the context says. To the extent that the revelation of God reaches those men and women like you, me, and everyone else we know who are not prophets, God sent it down to them also, albeit in a general and more diffused sense a sense which the traditionalist also accepts when it suits him. And it must be this broader, more general sense which is implied at 44:3-4. Why? Because the following context, in fact, the entire chapter treats of warning. That is, the emphasis throughout is not on the private receipt of revelation from God by the prophet, but on the delivery of that revelation to the people. Okay, that's the context. And if we are to claim a correlation between 44:3-4 and chapter 97, as the traditionalist does, on the strength of the similarities of their references to God sending down revelation on a particular night, and I certainly accept that correlation, then we should insist upon equivalence between the two segments. If receipt of revelation, whether heeded or not by the generality of men, rather than an initial private receipt by the prophet, be accepted as operative in the first case, if that's what we're saying, if we're saying it's being sent down to the generality of men, and that is certainly the case in the first case. Why? Because it's talking about warning people, warning the generality of men. It's not talking about a particular prophet in a cave or somewhere receiving a private revelation. Then it should be accepted in like manner in the second case. Quranically speaking, if you're going to accept that the Qur'an is complete and consistent, this is the only way you could possibly correlate these two parts of the Qur'an which have an obvious connection. And I'm not just saying they have an obvious connection because it furthers my case or I want it to be the case. It is the case. Why? Because it's the only places where this particular thing is talked about. But you look at the context and you correlate the context. What the traditionalist is doing is claiming something in the first case which is actually not true, which is talking about a specific time coming down to a specific person, and then claiming it for the second time, for the second case. And then he's over the hills and far away with Talmudically derived syncretic inventions. And what I'm saying is that I credit the Qur'an with being able to be understood on the basis of its claim to be complete revelation, and that's really what my work is all about. So I'm going to go back and read the verse because there's a lot here. If you're still with me, well done, because a lot more to go. But here we are. We sent it down on the night of the determination. All right. Now, I'm going to get into Qadr, which is variously translated, but usually interpreted not on the basis of implicit meaning, but on the basis of a derivative of a Talmudic assertion. It's not even in the Jewish canon. So now we'll talk about the word Qadr and what it may or may not mean. The etymological options and the sort of semantic options, the meanings of words, the options for the meanings of the Arabic Qadr, often rendered here divine decree, may be gathered into 5 general groupings. So there are 5 basic ballparks of what this word means in Arabic. The first is extent, scope, quantity, amount, scale, rate, measure, number. So this sort of concept, how much of something. The second is sum or amount in the sense of total. The third is degree or grade. The fourth is worth, standing, value and rank. And the fifth is divine decree. And we quite often get this with the traditionalist has been busy. And there's what I call a sore thumb word. The word doesn't. However, we'll leave that to one side for now. My opinion is that the sense of divine decree is a lexical development originating in another place, i.e. the Talmud. Be that as it may, it is certainly the case that such a value for Qadr occurs nowhere outside of the present chapter, even according to the traditionalist's own assessment. I go back to my Cinderella's ugly sisters motif again. This is what he does. It's all he can do. I'm so glad I don't have to answer or apologize, for this kind of content. He's got his assumed conclusions. He's come to the Quran. He said the Quran means what my external mythologies mean, and yet he's actually enforcing contradictions upon the Qur'an, because he cannot maintain this sense of divine decree for anywhere else where the word Qadr occurs in the Qur'an. He can't do it. He doesn't do it. Why? Because it doesn't make any sense. But he wants you to accept this in this particular case. According to the methodology applied in the present work, in order to find which of the remaining semantic groups is referenced here, we should look to all the remaining instances of Qadr in the text, and there are 4 of them. Excuse me. We find that in three of them, Qadr means measure in the sense of appraisal or estimation, and they measure not God with the measure due him. In the soul, in the only remaining case outside the present chapter, the context is also that of extent or measure, the limits of God at 65.1 and waiting term at 65.2. Thus, in all cases outside the present chapter, measure or extent is either the explicit sense, the dominant context, or both. However, here in this one specific case, this is with the traditionalist, this is what he does over and over again. He has to beat you over the head with his authorities. Because if you looked at the Qur'an, which we're actually called to do, you see that it doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't. We find that thus so I must therefore assume it to be the sense here also. Why? Because it's the sense everywhere else. Since at 691, 22, 74 and 39 and 67, the connotation of measure implied is that of appraisal or determination in the sense of evaluation. This is the value I identify and use here. This is I'm trying to give you a sort of in the trenches example of how the methodology on which my entire work was based, or one part of that methodology, works in the real world. So we've determined what the word means. It means determination in the sense of evaluation. Excuse me. The question remains as to who the active agent is in the determination on such a night. Is it God who does the determination? Is the one who does the determination, or is it man? Now the traditionalist assumes, and I emphasize the word assume, the former. He assumes that it is God who is referenced here, who is seen as establishing his decree on this special night over all events for the coming year. However, this is an assumption, and one for which he can point to no explicit Quranic support. And I've just told you about where this all comes from originally. Excuse me, which I didn't know when I wrote this. The only other place at which the construction night plus definite article plus noun occurs in the Qur'an, there is only one other place in the Qur'an where this occurs, and this is the way I work. You see, it's an iterative process, painstaking process. It's more like being an archaeologist. You're brushing away the layers of accretions by using a methodology that you can demonstrate. This is not sectarian, and it's not something that can't be improved upon. It should be improved upon. So the only other place where this occurs in the Quranic text is at 2:187, quote, on the night of the fast. That's the only other place where you find night plus definite article plus any noun. The active agents, i.e. the doers of the noun value, in this case are men. For it is not God who fasts, but men. And if we're interested in consistency, and the Qur'an cites consistency in support of its claim to originate with God, we should incline to the view that the operation of Al Qadr here pertains likewise, i.e. in Surah 97, primarily to men rather than to God. The above points accepted, the import, i.e. the meaning or the significance of this collocation, of this collection of words in this particular order, is that God sent down the Qur'an on the night on which men are or were to make a determination, an evaluation or assessment. So now we move to the next stage in our investigation. But in a determination, evaluation or assessment of what? The key to this question is grasped by understanding the full sense of the word salam as found at 97.5. And we'll get into that when we get into it. So I'm just going to read, we're going through this layer by layer by layer, moving away these accretions, trying to work out what this text means. If it's from God, if it is complete, and if it doesn't hold contradictions, what does it mean? Can these things be known? Can these things be found? Or do we just have to outsource our life to the beard-stroking mullahs and their tender care? Just as an aside, I had a couple of comments over the course of my time doing this work. Who do you think you are to have? Basically, who do you think you are to have an opinion on this? Well, my answer is, I'm a human being. I'm a man who's been given reason and intelligence, and I've been given I feel a duty to find the truth. And if the Qur'an be from God, if God has sent this book to me, as He's made it available to everyone else, I really want, if this is really from God, I want to know what it means. I'm not just going to, sit, flick through YouTube videos, and I'm going to dig into it. And I spent 20 years actually preparing for this work, and then 3 full years doing it. And this is what it takes if you really want to get good at something. So am I saying that what I've done is never to be surpassed? No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that this is my process of due diligence on the book, on the revelation that was given to mankind and came through Muhammad. That's what I am saying. And I realized that the Muslims weren't ever going to do this. You're going to wait a very, very long time. They hadn't done it in 1400 years. I looked at their work, I wasn't impressed. And my challenge always is do better. I've done the best that I can do, and if you can do better, great. It's not something that I'm going to feel hugely threatened by. But what I have done is developed a methodology that you can use, and that you can, and if you want to, you can develop and improve. But my qualification is that I fear God, and I don't want to go to God having not done that. So that's my qualification. And all I do is I share this work with other people who care. How do you want to go to God on the last day? He says, I gave you intelligence, I gave you reason, and you outsourced those to these guys? I don't want to be in that position. If you're happy with it, that's your call, but that's not something I'm going to do. So I'm going to read through up to the point that we're up to, because it's it takes some unpicking. It's quite terse. It's dense. Verse 1: we sent it down on the night of the determination. We sent it, revelation, down on the night of the determination, and we've established that the determination is something that men do, and that this happens at night. Verse 2: and what will convey to thee what the night of the determination is. Now, I'm criticized all the time, and I'm used to it. But why do I use thee, thou, and thy, and thine in my translation? Why do I not dumb it down and just say yo dude and things like this? Well, one of the reasons is that it actually helps that the English language has got the thee, thou, and thy. It indicates that you're talking to a singular person. We don't have the dual, regrettably, in English, except in things like words like pair of trousers, pair of scissors, etc. But pair is inherently dual concept, but we don't really have dual as a grammatical form. But we do have an archaic form, thee, thou, and thy. And the reason why I used it in my translation is that it helps us understand when God is either talking directly to the prophet, or talking to the believer as an individual. And that's significant. So seeing as we have recourse to that, I've used that. So verse 2 reads, "And what will convey to thee what the night of the determination is?" Now this is very interesting. The convention and what will convey to thee occurs quite a number of times in the Qur'an. And I list them all here, and you can see them in the notes below. It always indicates something which Muhammad, the recipient of the Qur'an, is not expected to understand, and for which there follows an explanation. So this really puts paid to the idea that Muhammad understood everything about the Qur'an, which is something that you have to sort of, this is what the traditionalists have you believe, that there are things that he didn't understand. The traditionalist claims honours for the Prophet, which the Qur'an denies him. Now, I'm not going to get into that much more here, but the fact is that he didn't know what this meant or what it means, and the Qur'an is going to explain it. And if you want my evidence, you can look through the 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know what it is, 12, 15 verses where this expression, convention occurs, and you'll find that with unerring regularity, that's what's happening, that God is explaining to Muhammad something that he didn't know. And such is the case here. Also, at 97.2, the Qur'an presents a Muhammad ignorant of the meaning of Layl Al Qadr, a point which starkly contrasts with the hadith literature, which ascribes to Muhammad here, as so often, knowledge the Qur'an denies him. The hadith literature has Muslims looking for a special night in the hopes of gaining some uncommon access to God, who on the correct night, so it is claimed, determines all the affairs for the years ahead. Such exegesis supplies superficial but unfounded Quranic support to those who are temperamentally inclined to abdicate personal responsibility, so to do, to refuse to correlate the results of their lives with their own actions, and to look for benefit to particular times instead of to the observation of extant and operative laws of God, which practice is properly regarded as a form of polytheism. And what you end up with, if you have people who do this sort of inshallah and just sitting around and waiting for, not doing anything, and God's going to sort of jump out and do everything, you end up with Pakistan, where nobody wants to live. And mainly Pakistanis. I mean, everyone's I've known who could get out of that country has got out of it, or wherever it is. So this religion called Islam, it has the result demonstrates to me that it isn't based in the word of God to any extent, because it's so useless. An interesting point being, and it's just occurred to me, there's actually a correlation between the destruction of the Second Temple and the destruction of the Islamic Caliphate and any sort of respect in the world, scientifically, economically, whatever. I mean, you've got Saudi Arabia, you've got countries with money, but they're vassal states of America and Israel. I mean, let's be honest. And they, if the price of oil goes up, they get more sort of spending money. If it goes down, they get less spending money. But it's not really, they're petrodollars. They can't keep them. They're not independent. They don't produce anything. They don't. What great inventions have come out of the Islamic world? Nothing in the last 500, 600, 700 years. Nothing. I'm not being critical. I can say some very similar things, not similar things, but critical things about what's going on in the West. I'm just stating facts, and I think people listening to this know this. So there is actually a correlation psychologically between the destruction of the Second Temple, beg your pardon, between the destruction of the First Temple, in the destruction of Solomon's Temple, prior to Babylon, and the end of any sort of Islamic, respect, for want of a better word. the historicity, the historical events really demonstrate the weakness of the premise. And what I'm doing is actually separating this cultural narrative, which I have no interest in. And people assume that if you're you're dealing with the Qur'an, that you're a Muslim, whatever they mean by that, or that you've got some allegiance to this. I have no allegiance to this thing whatsoever. It has as much correlation to the Qur'an as Jehovah's Witnesses or Hare Krishnas. Quite frankly, I'm not interested in it. On the basis of what I do, I treat the Qur'an as if I'd found it in a box buried in the ground, and that nobody's heard of this thing. I treat it as a text. What does this text mean? What Sharia laws and lunacies and this, that, and the other, and so-called liberal Muslims and modern Muslims and the 19ers and this, that, and the other. I don't personally care. It means nothing to me. What I'm doing is my personal due diligence on this book. That's it. And so I hope I'm sort of making this point clear. I do make it quite often, but people confuse this for me. It's not that I'm against Muslims. I'm indifferent. I meet good Muslims, so-called Muslims. I meet bad ones. It's not a point of determination for me. It's what I look at is what they do, the labels they wear. It's like a football shirt. It doesn't really mean anything to me. I'm not interested in it. Quite frankly, I don't think God is either. That's my personal opinion. So anyway, we find that Muhammad doesn't know what this means. And as I've been through and stated, the observation of particular times is a form of polytheism. I'm going to go back now and read again, because this is a very condensed surah and there was a lot to unpack. Verse 1, we sent it down on the night of the determination. And what will convey to thee what the night of the determination is. 2 verses, okay? Now we're going to go into verse 3, which reads, the night of the determination is better than 1,000 moons. Now I've had comments, people said, Sam Gerrans translates shahr as moon. It doesn't mean moon, it means month. Yeah, I know. It's just you don't know English, my friend, or not very well. And moon in a slightly older form of English outside of Facebook and emails, moon does mean month. It's where we derive the word moon, and I'm using the word. The reason why I used moon is because it, as in Arabic, it means both, and that's what I'm doing. I wanted to encompass both those two meanings. We met 3. I haven't seen you for many a moon. That's what in real English, not headway intermediate English, but actual English, how people in England speak. This is what in native English speakers, they understand that it means month in the same way as in Arabic. So 1,000 moons. What do we mean here? 1,000 moons. Well, it sounds like a grandiose statement, doesn't it? It sounds like 1,000 moons, lots of moons. What does it actually mean? So I worked it out. 1,000 moons is equal to just over 83 solar years, which is a long life by any reckoning. 83 years, that's a good innings. So let's take it literally. 1,000 moons, 83 years. Thus, the night of determination is better than, in this case, 83 years, than a long life. And we'll find out what kind of long life when we get to the next bit. Or as we see in the second clause, I'll just tell you now, of 97.4, as it shows, of a long life no matter how spent. Okay, now we're moving into verse 4, but I'll read the whole thing again because this is, it takes time to get this. We sent it down on the night of the determination. And what will convey to thee what the night of the determination is? The night of the determination is better than 1,000 moons. It's better than a whole lifetime. Now we go into verse 4. As you'll find if you look at any number of translations, there's a disconnect between this verse and of verse 4 and verse 3. And part of my methodology has been to understand that the Qur'an has what you might call implicit punctuation. It has implicit parenthesis. There are places where phrases are slightly disjointed, but they make perfect sense when you put them in parentheses. And that's all I've done here, which allows the night of the determination is better than 1,000 moons to make perfect sense with what follows the first clause of verse 4, which if you do look at other translations, and you must, I really recommend you do, how they push and squeeze and they can't really make it work. So the first clause of verse 4 says, the angels and the spirit descend therein by the leave of their Lord. Having properly understood these from the notes again and passed the rest of the chapter, P-A-R-S-E-D, i.e. divided up into bits, the rest of the chapter, the present clause falls naturally into a nested parenthetical statement. Nested is just a term that comes from programming, actually. If you're making a list, a bullet points list, then you have an indentation where it goes into a sort of subset of that, and then you come back. That's what this is. This is what parentheses really are. It's going off at a sort of tangent and then coming back to the main thread. And I'll just go back and read. We sent it down on the night of the determination. And what will convey to thee what the night of the determination is? The night of the determination is better than 1,000 moons. Parenthesis. The angels and the spirit descend therein by the leave of their Lord. Back to the main point. Of every sort of affair. 1,000 moons of every sort of affair. Now this is min kulli amri. Min kulli amri. And I'm going to just explain why that doesn't mean what the traditionalist says it means, because again here he has to make it, he has to push and shove. Just this, Cinderella's ugly sisters. I don't envy the guy. I don't envy them. I would hate to have to defend this. The translators render min kulli here as on every, and they have to insert a word errand, or with each, and then they have to insert a word decree. Nowhere, but it doesn't say that. And nowhere in the remaining 44 instances of min kulli in the Qur'an, and I've been through them all. This is my methodology. I'm just opening a very small window to you of what I spent 3 years doing, just doing this. Okay, in the Qur'an, do we find anything close to such a value? It doesn't exist. So again, they have to just push and shove and push and shove. And what I'm doing is I'm going to all of the examples and saying, no, this is not right. You're claiming an exception here on the basis of this extraneous stuff. And they're saying that without this extraneous stuff, this cannot be understood. I'm saying your extraneous stuff is making this unintelligible. And I'm going within the Qur'an to what it provides and presenting cogent, consistent data to support the interpretations, the exegesis that I'm presenting, which actually makes sense. Nowhere in the remaining 44 instances of min kulli in the Qur'an do we find anything close to such a value. The task in hand is not to try to bend the Qur'an to what one's favorite school of Islam has constructed on the basis of hadith or even the Talmud, but to seek coherence and sense within the integrity of the Qur'an's own fabric. And again, I go back to the wonderful quote from Isaiah Berlin: to understand is to perceive patterns. When I read that, I thought that's absolutely right. This is what I've been doing. I've been seeking patterns, finding patterns, recording patterns and presenting my evidence. That's what this work is. On such a basis, min kulli can only mean every sort of every, among every, from among every, and amr means command, matter, or affair. That's what it means in the Qur'an, which they're all the same meaning. They're just different ways of presenting it depending on the context to make it sound more natural English. By treating the phrase above as a nested statement, okay, well, I'm just like I was talking about bullet points and then you're indenting them. And, excuse me, I'm having to sort of traverse my rather large presentation. By treating the phrase above as a nested statement, see the note there too, and min kulli in accordance with its commonest pantextual value, and I've got more on that somewhere else which you can read, the sense becomes the night of the determination is better than 1,000 moons of every sort of affair. So the import, the significance, the meaning of this second part of this statement, when you take the parenthetical statement, just put it to one side for a second, is no matter how well, how lived, or of any type whatever. So the night of determination is better than any life, no matter how lived. And the statement which is disjointed, and you'll see because but ceases to be just disjointed when you understand that it's a parenthetical statement, the angels and the spirit descend therein by the leave of their Lord. It does seem disjointed, of course it does, but it's because it's a parenthetical statement and it doesn't lead on naturally to the next bit. But once you realize that it's indented, it makes sense. So I'm going to read this again, just so we keep it fresh. Okay, I'm just scrolling here, because it's such a huge file. I mean, it's massive. So we sent it down on the night of the determination. And what will convey to thee what the night of the determination is? The night of the determination is better than 1,000 moons. The angel and the spirit descend therein by the leave of their Lord of every sort of affair. Okay, now we come to the last verse, verse 5. Peace, salam. And then this is the first bit, and then there's more, or a little bit more, but I'm going to just deal with this first. Arabic, salam. Excuse me. Soundness, well-being, peace, peacefulness, safety, security. These are the meanings. Contextual comparison, again, contextual comparison, contextual analysis, painstaking process by which you can ascertain meaning. Just as a sort of an aside, I once knew a chap who, when I was first interested in the Qur'an and thought that Muslims might know what it meant, and I didn't, this is many years ago, couldn't read Arabic, didn't know Arabic at this time, or Quranic Arabic. And I liked this guy. He was I think he worked at British Telecom or something. He was one of these sort of programmer kind of guys. He was very competent in his own area. But the sort of the laid-back attitude to the Qur'an I found quite shocking. I mean, I'd really been looking for truth. I'd been through a lot, and I was interested in it. And he said to me once, because I kept buying all these different translations and comparing them and trying, why is this not making sense? He said, why do you worry about it? It's just the choice of words. I thought, just the choice of words. I'd like to see your attitude if we were going to drop a contract which involved money of any kind. Just the choice of words. The meanings of words. What words mean are absolutely vital. And if you don't believe that, check out Black's Dictionary of Law, where terms that you think you know what they mean, you find out what they actually mean in there. This is the legal definition. This is what judges and lawyers mean when they use these terms. So when you're saying something in a court of law, they're saying something completely different. But because you don't know the definitions, you are ignorant I am ignorant, anyone is ignorant of the process that's actually going on, that you're agreeing to be judged by, as a corporate entity. I mean, it's a whole subject, but the meaning of the words is vital. And that's really what I'm about. I'm about defining words. And it absolutely matters what words mean. If we're saying that God sent down a revelation to mankind and that is consistent and preserved, I want to know what it means. What it actually means. So, contextual comparison of all instances of salam as found in this context, i.e. without following modifiers such as be unto you and so on. So when salam, the word salam occurs as a singular word on its own, and then I list all of these instances, I'm not going to count them, but it's about 12 or 15, reveals this convention to possess the following applications. Number one, as a general greeting for persons either known or not known. Two, as a means of respectfully extricating oneself from interaction with those who are either ignorant or who reject faith. And three, God's greeting to the believers, specifically upon their being received into the joys of the fuller life, being received into the garden. The first two applications are fully consonant with the present context as understood and expounded here, i.e. that this is the night vigil, as I mentioned at the beginning. This is to do with as-sujud, and I'm going to look and see if I've done a video on that. If I haven't, then I will try to soon. But you can read, right? So it's in the end of my work. But this is really a function of the work on the muqaṭṭaʿāt. This is a complicated subject, but do you care or do you not care? I care. I want to know. So I spent the time doing it, and all I'm doing is presenting my findings. So the first two applications, i.e. as a general greeting for people either known or not known, and two, a means of kind of getting shot of people who are either ignorant or reject faith, are fully consonant with the present context as understood and expounded here, which is that of a night vigil to which you, and I'll get into this in a bit more detail, invite others to hear the word of God. That's what this is. This is what the night of the determination actually is. It's not sitting there waiting for some special thing to happen, although you don't obey the laws of God, expecting that you can create some sort of aberration in the laws that God has set down, that somehow he's going to, no, they don't apply anymore, because you managed to hit this right night, special night. I don't believe this. And the third application, which is to do with God's greeting to the believers, specifically when they enter into the garden, is aptly and beautifully prefigured. So I'm going to go back and read again so we can just keep reminding ourselves what we've learnt. Sorry about the time it takes to scroll. The font is so huge that it moves very slowly. Verse 1, we sent it, i.e. the revelation, to mankind, to a broader base of people, down on the night of the determination. And we've established that we know what night means, and we know that the determination is something that men do. And what will convey to thee what the night of the determination is? So again, the recipient of the Qur'an didn't understand this, and we know this, we can prove this absolutely Qur'anically. 3, the night of the determination is better than 1,000 moons, parenthesis, the angels and the spirit descend therein by the leave of their Lord. This point being that this is not Muhammad doing it, not you doing it. It's only by the leave of God that this happens. Of every sort of affair, this relates again back to the 1,000 moons. It's better than any life, no matter how lived. Peace, salam, and then it ends. It is until the emergence of dawn. And we're going to just unpack this a bit. This is the end of the surah, and then I'll read it through again, and then we'll close. So it here, the feminine pronoun, it's a feminine pronoun, so it agrees with night. Based on the totality of my investigations, the results of which comprise this translation and the notes thereto, the collocation, the night of the determination, this set phrase, is a function of what is identified in the broader work as the submission, as sujud, which I mentioned previously, i.e. that night vigil to which others are invited to hear the word of God. And I outlined the articles where you can find this. All my notes are here. I'm not going to go through this in detail here. This is enough for one YouTube video. The chapters for which comprise a subset of the Qur'an, and this is something that if you can make the time, and you need a pen and paper to work it, to follow it, but to understand the muqaṭṭaʿāt, which I've done a whole video, and it's not just me talking. I've just like a PowerPoint presentation, everything. You'll see what it is. The night of determination. On the night of the determination, men make their determinations. This is all it is. Some men, among those outside the fold of believers, accept, and others reject. So salam is apropos here. Why? Because in all the other cases, as I just said, this is where it's commonly used. Meanwhile, believers themselves make their determinations of those to whom the words of God have been recited, whether they be believers, rejectors, or ones lost in ignorance. Again, salam is appropriate. And for those who enter into the Qur'an, into belief, they are entering into the garden in some, sense of this prefigured sense. Again, salam is appropriate. Just to recap the surah, it, i.e. it, the night, here, it, Layla, isn't until the emergence of dawn. And there are corresponding other parts of the Qur'an which I'm not going to go into now, which support this. When you understand this first, and there is quite a lot to get, but when you get it, you will find a lot of other shorter surahs, beginning sort of 50, particularly Al-Qalam, working, which is where Qaf occurs, and working forward. They'll start to make more sense. I'm going to read the whole of this surah, and then we'll close. We sent it down on the night of the determination. And again, the Arabic here uses the past tense, which quite often can be frequentative. We send it down. But we sent it down on the night of the determination. And what will convey to thee what the night of the determination is? The night of the determination is better than 1,000 moons. The angel and the spirit descend therein by the leave of their Lord, of every sort of affair, or of any sort of affair. Min kulli amri. Peace. It is until the emergence of dawn. That's when it stops. It's very compact and requires some time to understand, but I believe that this surah has been so badly mangled and maligned by the traditionalist and on the basis of Talmudic invention that I thought it was worth the time unpacking it in a video. I hope you found it useful, and I'm going to stop there. That's all for now. If you're listening on YouTube, you can download my full translation of the Qur'an free using the button in the top right hand corner, or buy the hard copy there at 10% less than on Amazon. I also encourage you to sign up for the Qur'anite Plus newsletter on the site to get occasional micro updates. You can download the audio from my YouTube videos to your mobile device using the links in the drop down below. I recommend meetquranites.com to connect with other Quran alone believers. Like if you like, comment if you have something constructive to say, and subscribe to get more each week. And use the link in the drop down below to donate if you would like to help me keep doing this. And remember, this life is short, eternity is long. If you want good trees, plant good seeds.